Everybody, hope you're doing well. Continuing on with our dynamic web architectures content, we are going to be now talking about Flask, which is a Python-based MVC framework. So you have gone through Ruby on Rails. We've talked a bit about PHP. Hopefully you're realizing that there are a ton of different frameworks out there for enabling dynamic content generation, and a lot of them are MVC based. Now, Flask is an interesting one, A, because it's in Python, which is, really nice if you're a Python user, but it's also very lightweight. So if you have, say, a home Internet of Things project where you want to monitor something, and you want to have nice, easy access to, say, hardware sensors, well, you can read that in with Python and just kind of pipe it over to Flask very nicely. Now, in the description and in Blackboard, I've got a little guide here if you're interested. Basically, it's going to be using a Raspberry Pi to control some of our GPIO settings from the web. So basically here we have a picture of a Pi and a little breadboard. And, if you don't know any of these acronyms, that's fine. But basically you're just controlling the settings of data in and data out to this, from the Pi to this breadboard. And this is not the demo I'm going through. I just find it kind of fun. Raspberry Pis, if you're not familiar, they're tiny little microcomputers. Generally relatively cheap. I think presently they're a bit more expensive just because they're hard to get with hardware shortages and all that. Typically, they're in the $30 range for this little tiny computer, and all it is a small Linux machine. So anything you can do on a normal web server, you can do on a Pi. It's a lot more efficient and cheap. It's just a little bit less power, significantly less power. Anyway, this project is going to use Flask. You're going to need some LEDs and resistors and a breadboard, a little bit of wiring know-how, obviously. But the idea is that you come up, thank you, ads, you come up with a web server, Flask-based, where it's going to present buttons. It'll present information from the Pi and the sensors that it's connected to. And you will control this thing via a web application. Now, what's really happening under the hood is that you click a button, it's going to fire off a response to Flask, which is then going to interpret it as some kind of a low-level Python command. It's going to basically route this command to wherever it needs to go. And because you are on this, tiny microcomputer platform, you have direct access to the buttons, the GPIO, the pins, pretty much everything. So again, I'd kind of recommend checking this out if this is something that you're into. I find it kind of a nice real-world example of how web servers can actually interface with things other than, basic websites. But what we're going to be doing in here is basically talking through a couple of little Flask demos. Now, depending on how long this goes, already yammered on for 3 minutes here, but I'm going to show you the basic setup, and then I will show you a templated setup. And it's going to look pretty similar to what we did with Rails with the Vue templates. So again, just kind of set context here. Why do we care about another framework? Isn't Rails enough, or isn't PHP enough, or isn't .NET enough? There's going to be a use case for everything, right? People like Python. People like efficient, lightweight servers. Flask is perfect for that. And again, there's going to be many, many, many architectures out there. It's just going to be based on what you like, what you want to use, and what your company project requires, so on and so forth. So what is Flask? I have pretty much talked through all of this already, so I'll let you read through this as we go. It works very well with SQLite. So if you want a lightweight database engine, you probably saw that a bit with some of our Rails demos. It works okay with MySQL/MariaDB. It's a bit more of a pain to set up. At least I find it more of a pain because you have to manually track the cursor inside the database, and it gets kind of mucky, but honestly, it works just fine if you want to use a database project. And I'm sure there's libraries that I'm not aware of that make it even easier because that's just how Python is. But the tutorial that I'm going to be walking you through with here is the second one, and it's basically just going to I've got it off screen here. It's going to walk you through some of the basics, and It's not a requirement for you all because you're going to have your hands busy with Rails and with a little bit of PHP. And again, it's kind of more of the same. It's just in Python. But if you're a Python user, if this is something that you like, I would highly recommend checking it out because it's very easy to get up and running. So we're going to do a basic web page. We're going to do a templated web page, and that's going to be pretty much be the limit of our experience here. So what do we have to do and what are we going to be going through? We have to install Flask, and we have to do pretty much everything else here. And the last thing that I'll end with is showing you how to let it run forever, which is something that I kind of skipped over in the Rails aspect, but it's a good thing to know as well. And just for reference, I'm going to be using the same micro instance that I have been using for class so far. So this is where I left off in terms of demos. So this is our self-signed certificate, just going to the home directory. And actually, this might be going to one of our virtual hosts. Don't remember what I routed port 80 to at this point because this machine has just been horribly abused. But let's get started here. So what we need is to clear this out and zoom in a touch. Oh, we're already large. Okay. So if you have never done this before, and I'm doing this on my micro instance, not on my local computer, so there's a couple of things we have to do differently. First, we're going to need to install Python 3, and we're going to need pip. So Python 3 is the language. Pip is going to be the package installer, which honestly to me is the easiest to use. There's also easy install if you want to go that route. I know a lot of people like Anaconda. That's way outside of what I'm used to. I'm not a big fan of Anaconda, but I know it's very easy to use for other people. I'm not going to use it though. I've already installed these separately, but basically this would just get everything running. We can do a quick check. Python 3. I see that I'm running 3.8, so life is good there. And what else do we need? We installed pip, or we need to install Flask. So I'm going to install Flask with pip here. And most guides you will see just will say use pip install or pip3 install. I tend to have multiple Python distributions running on my computer at any given time. So I've got like Python 2.7, 2.8, 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9. I don't think I have 2.10 yet. But basically, this is going to help me disambiguate the version. And other thing too, with Python, when you install a module, it's going to be dependent on the version that you installed it for, because it's going to be installed in the directory for that particular installation. So I'm going to install Flask. Again, I already did this, so it's not going to really do anything, but you can kind of get a feel for the packages that it will be installing. All right, let's make a directory for this folder. So I'm going to call it 658 flat. Move to 658 Flask. If you don't know how to rename a file, here's your file or a folder. There you go. It's MV. And I'm going to go inside this directory, and I'm going to do everything that I want to in here. Now, just for reference, pwd is going to tell you where you are at. This is in my home directory, my user directory, and then this 658 directory. So I'm running this web server just from my user account. I'm not putting it in var www.html. This will run wherever I tell it to run from. All right, so good so far. Let's go ahead and create our first Hello World application, which is required for, pretty much every project. So I'm going to call this hello.py. Is that even what this? Yeah, even the demo called it that. So I want to import Flask. So from Flask, import Flask. And I want to create an application, Flask main. So this is going to create a variable, which is using Flask, and it's going to bring in the name of our file. And I need to define a route. So this is going to be the home directory. I'll talk through this in a second here. Return hello 658 students from Flask. Wow, I can type today. Flask band. Okay, so this is going to be the function that is called whenever Flask detects the route for the home path. So if you know from Linux, / is the root or the home. Well, it's the root. And what Flask is going to see is if we go to this web server on the root, which is basically you know, your IP address or your domain name and nothing after that. That's the root. Do this. All right. So now we have to define a main function because this is Python, not strictly required. I like to do this just because it's kind of proper, but this is going to be our main, this is like void main in Python. And we want to run our application. So this variable we created up here is our Flask application. This is our default route. Here we are telling Flask to run it once our program, starts up and runs. Now this will not work. It's full disclosure, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Hopefully eagle-eyed viewers can tell us why that's happening. But, oh, you know what? I'm going to tmux this, so give me 1 second because I want this server to just be running. So let's scoot you over here a touch, edit our file. Wow, that looks terrible. Python. Good. All right, so I'm running Python 3, hello.py. This will run. And actually, let me scoot it over a touch. So serving Flask, so it's basically just running the application that we told it to. This is a dev server. I haven't specified anything to make this production. So when you see these warnings, this is a test server. And I see running on localhost :5000, meaning that the server is up and running. Default port is 5000. What that means is that we need to open up the local port on this computer, and we also need to open it up in our Google Cloud VPC network, right? Just like with Rails. I already did that just for your benefit, but let's, let me do it over here. Love tmux. So sudo ufw allow 5000. I already added it again, so we're good here. And over in our VPC network, I did the same thing as we did before. Right, I went to this default allow HTTP rule, updated it to also include edits so that you all see the same thing. I just added 5000 here. I didn't want to mess up my virtual hosts or anything else that I was playing with Rails, so we're going to use 5000. Honestly, typically you would use port 80 or a standard web server. 5000 is fine for development purposes. All right, so we have our port open. We have our server running. So all that should happen now is that I go to 5000 here, right? And let me get rid of this S because this is not a signed website. Okay, so I'm going to click go ahead, and this will not work. It's going to take forever or it's going to refuse to connect. So why is this happening? Hopefully you remember back to early Rails where if you see a server running on 127.0.0.1, that is a local machine only instance. All right, so basically I need to run this on 0000, otherwise other people can't access it. Good. So let's fix this. Now let's see. I'm not sure if this is going to reload or not. I think it does. It should. We'll see. Anyway, what I need to do is, let me refresh my memory on the syntax here. Okay. So I need host equals 0.0.0.0, port equals 5000. Okay. So in this app.run, I'm going to configure it to run as a actual server. We'll leave it as port 5000, should be good. And if I refresh this, it shouldn't work because, yeah, it didn't reload. So I'm going to cancel this, reload it. We see now that it's running on an actual IP address, which, if you look at this, it's the internal IP for Google. It should be fine. I refresh over here. Hey, my page came up. So again, things to consider. Ports need to be open on the machine and in VPC network. We need to set the host to be 0.0.0.0 and make sure there's no conflicts with other ports and things like that. So we have a Flask application. Now, what else could we do? Let me close this. Let's add another route. So at app.route / coffee. Okay, def coffee. Notice I'm just giving it arbitrary function names because it's looking for this route. Return h1 style equals, okay, don't do this. Use a style sheet. Color FFOOFF. I need more coffee. It's been a very long day. Okay. Restart our server. Home page is still fine. /coffee. There we go. Hot pink. I need more coffee. Unbranded, not not headache reducing, horribly burned beans. So, new route /coffee. I could also do another one. So if I've got, oops, /more, return. I still need a touch more caffeine to caffeine. I know how to spell to get through the rest of the demo. Close our I. No semicolons in Python. You actually see here, this is useful too, on the right, on your server, you get a log of who's accessing which resource as well. Refresh. And I do know that there's a way to have Python automatically reload this. I just have chosen not to do that. Okay, have an error. Forgot my colon here. Run again. Did I do something wrong? Oh, don't need a semicolon. I forgot the function name. Wow, silly me. Okay, there we go. Need coffee, and then I said more. There we go. So, the other thing to keep in mind too, case sensitive, so make sure you get your capitalization correct. But there we have a very, very simple demo. Alrighty. So where are we at time-wise? 17 minutes. I will break this up into a second part. See you in the next one.